there's certainly a trend on a few of these books about things that are just passions but are quite obscure at the time, becoming more mainstream over time. And because these guys have been there from the start but also are purists, they tend to be in a great position to kind of do what they love while actually running really successful businesses. So
why do you think that is, mate? Like what do you think that is?
What I think that is actually the growth of the economy. So I think it can be like viewed a bit from a macro thing where essentially, you know, as economies get bigger, they generally, you get more specialized in what you do, but what you consume becomes a lot more broad. And this is something I've read. And so essentially people start to have, there's more people. And because they've got more disposable income, and they also are able to have more broad interests. So the thing that is kind of esoteric in 1950 becomes a bit more popular and a bit easier to spread, and becomes a kind of it doesn't mean everything will get popular, but it's kind of the same reason. I don't know. It seems to me to be sort of the same reason your house gets, or they're kind of connected. The reason that maybe your house goes up in value is the similar thing. It's just lots of people are around, and what was kind of a block in the back of Baldwin in 1940 you could purchase for $2,000 is now a very highly sought after piece of property because it's no longer the Wild West. So
the wild west of eastern Melbourne.
The Wild East.
The Wild East.
Yeah. Does that kind of make sense? That's my opinion.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it does. I think maybe the economic growth definitely has something to do with it, because unless people have, I guess, the disposable income to go and do things like go rock climbing, or the disposable income not just to purchase the equipment to do it, but actually do something else other than working, for example. So, for example, you know, to contrast that, I just mentioned that I was reading Mademoiselle Chanel, and not to spoil that, but she was working like 6 days a week, 13 plus hours a day. And then they would have just enough time on their Sunday day off to go back, visit their grandparents / parents. That sounds weird, but that was legit. And yeah, it's not as bad as what it sounds. And I'm not giving any more away. You just have to wait. And
that's a good teaser.
Yeah, nice. And so yeah, and then the Sunday they would basically spend traveling back to their hometown and then eat a meal, basically because they weren't eating much during the week because they just couldn't afford to eat, and all their money was basically going to pay for the rent that they owed to the boss that they were renting their houses off, who was also paying them like a pittance to be working all these hours, you know, and it was just this cycle.
Yeah.
And so as you've struck on, Lockie, you know, the fact is less and less people are doing that nowadays, whereas, you know, there was definitely a time where that was commonplace. Yeah, that was very, very commonplace.
Yeah. Yeah,
and so,
it's interesting. Like, and that's not, the upward mobility of that time was amazing, really, for during that period in the Western countries. And you can argue maybe you're seeing something similar in China at the moment. It is brutal on the people who are going through it. But the generation that comes after probably, you know, is able to kind of, I guess, benefit from all the hard work of the previous generation.
Yeah, I think you've hit on a really interesting point. So just before that, so there's the economic bit, but I think there's also just the population side, the population growth and the technology side. So the population side, I think just by having more people, you have more potential to have, instead of having one person interested in a particular niche interest, you know, you might have 30 people, and 30 people is enough to make a little club, and then we can get together on Thursdays and discuss, you know, what our favorite, what's your clown, the psycho clown posse?
The insane clown posse.
Insane clown posse. So, you know, you can continue to do that, Lockie, on a Thursday afternoon.
Yeah, you can find your tribe.
You can find your tribe.
Easier.
And then with the advent of social media, you can now find your tribe on the other side of the world and have e-meetups, you know, online meetups. So you're not constrained by geography like we used to be.
Yeah, because an idea or a technology or that, it spreads. So if part of the thing that's growing is the ability to spread things quickly, you're going to get a lot more movement. And then if there's more people to pick that thing up in the first place, and it's easier to ship and transport, and you kind of get this natural swell. But because you were there early, you get this kind of, and you're a hardcore person who really enjoys it, you're going to get this uplift as you go, and you're one of the best because you're just fanatical about it. And I think you see that over and over again. Like Shoe Dog is a great example of that, which I hope we do an episode on that soon. That running was like this really obscure thing.
That is so strange, isn't it? The fact that running was like it was almost like a weird thing to do. People that went running were weirdos.
Yeah. And then you've got, you know, even you could argue basketball before Jordan was more obscure. Now it was already like had a nice little plateau, but you would say that, you know, he changed almost everything about that game. And what seems to happen is once it reaches a certain, particularly if you get the cultural piece right, it bleeds over into things that have nothing to do with the initial purpose. Like Patagonia may be a good example of that. Nike was for runners, now it's for everything, you know. And Jordan was a cultural icon, you know. So
yeah, one of the real big case in points there was episode 5, which was Total Recall. Now we're kind of spreading beyond here, but Total Recall, weightlifting. Weightlifting was like almost taboo. It wasn't just for weirdos. It was like taboo to be a weightlifter for, you know, some reason.
Yeah, and then
I think it has to do with like social conservativeness or something of that nature. And
yeah, maybe Dylan's an example of that too. Like,
yeah, in the folk music. Is that episode 20? Does that scrape in?
That is episode 20, so we can count it.
Okay, great.